Hey guys, tonight we're going to dive deep into a world often romanticized and sometimes misunderstood, the world of Viking Age. Dating. Forget your apps, your carefully curated profiles, and your awkward first coffee dates. Imagine a time where love wasn't just a feeling, but often a complex negotiation of alliances, resources, and sheer survival. You're standing on the cold, windswept shores of Scandinavia, the scent of salt and wood smoke heavy in the air. The longhouse fire crackles, casting dancing shadows on the faces of the people gathered within. Outside, the harsh northern winds howl, a constant reminder of the brutal realities of life. You see a flash of a finely woven tunic, a glint of an intricately carved silver arm ring, and you realize that even in this rugged existence, human connection, partnership, and yes, even love were central to everything. But be warned, if you think modern dating is tough, you probably wouldn't have survived a week trying to find a spouse in the Viking Age. You'd likely be married off to some distant cousin to settle a land dispute, or worse, left to spinsterhood while everyone else got to have all the fun. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment below with your current location and local time. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a bustling Viking settlement, perhaps a place like Kopong or Birka, where merchants haggle over furs and amber, and the clang of the smithy echoes through the air. You're not here for trade, though. You're here because, well, you're of an age where such things matter, and the eyes of the community are beginning to turn towards your prospects. Unlike today, where a fleeting glance across a crowded room might spark a romance, in the Viking Age, your first glance at a potential partner was often less about personal attraction and more about family ties and reputation. Imagine for a moment that you were a young woman. Your hair, perhaps braided with threads of silver or gold, falls down your back and you're wearing a sturdy but well-made smocker, a fitted overdress over a long linen shift. You spend your days tending to the farm, spinning wool, weaving cloth, and preparing meals. You're strong, capable, and knowledgeable in the ways of the household, skills that are far more highly prized than a dazzling smile or a quick wit. When a potential suitor is being considered, it's not just your qualities that are scrutinized. Oh no, it's your entire lineage. Your father's standing, your mother's family, the alliances they've forged, the feuds they've survived. All of it plays a crucial role. You might hear whispers in the longhouse, hushed conversations among the older women as they discuss the suitability of a match. Is his family honorable? Are they wealthy in land or cattle? Do they have a history of bravery in battle, or are they known for treachery? These are the questions that precede any thought of personal affection. Let's flip the coin. What if you're a young man, a budding warrior, or a skilled craftsman? You've proven your strength perhaps by wielding an axe in a skirmish or by crafting exquisite tools. You possess the resources to support a household, whether through your labor or inherited wealth. Your reputation for courage, generosity, and capability is paramount. When you consider a woman, it's not just her beauty, though that certainly played a part as evidenced by poetic descriptions in the sagas, but her ability to run a household, bear strong children, and contribute to the family's prosperity. She needs to be practical, resilient, and capable of managing the complex affairs of a farm in your absence, especially if you plan on raiding or trading abroad. This isn't to say personal attraction was completely absent. Far from it. Sagas occasionally speak of love at first sight, of intense passions, and of individuals defying societal expectations for the sake of love. However, these are often the exceptions that prove the rule, the dramatic narratives that capture our imagination, precisely because they deviated from the norm. For the average Viking Age individual, a marriage was first and foremost a strategic alliance between two families. It cemented bonds, resolved disputes, and consolidated power and resources. It was a pragmatic decision often orchestrated by parents or guardians with the best interests of the kin group at heart. You might find yourself at a thing, an assembly or governing body where legal matters are settled and community decisions are made. It's a bustling affair with people from various settlements gathered. Here, more formal introductions might occur. Your father or perhaps your uncle might engage in a casual conversation with the head of another household, subtly steering the discussion towards their respective children. It's like a corporate merger, but with more meat and less paperwork. They're sizing each other up, assessing potential benefits and drawbacks. Is this a family that will bring honor and strength? Or will they be a burden, a source of future feuds? Consider the role of the Gaudii, a chieftain or priest in some regions, or simply respected elders. They might act as intermediaries helping to broker these arrangements. They know the families, their histories, their strengths, and their weaknesses. Their wisdom and influence could smooth the path to a favorable match, or indeed warn against an ill-suited one. You wouldn't be dating in the modern sense of going on individual outings to get to know someone. Your interactions would be within the context of community gatherings, feasts, and daily life. You'd observe potential partners from afar, watching how they interact with their families, how they contribute to the community, and how they carry themselves. There's a subtle dance of nonverbal communication of reputation preceding you. If you are known for your generosity and wit, that would be your profile. If you are known for your hot temper or laziness, that too would spread through the grapevine faster than any viral video. Gossip, it turns out, was a potent force in all ages. Imagine a young man skilled with the axe and strong of arm, yet with a reputation for being overly boastful. His strength might be appealing, but his arrogance could be a deterrent. Conversely, a young woman might be beautiful, but if she is known to be idle or disobedient, her prospects would diminish. It's a curious blend of objective assessment and subjective perception, all filtered through the lens of family and community expectations. The concept of dowry, as we understand it, where the bride brings wealth to the marriage, was not the primary custom in the Viking Age. Instead, it was often the bride wealth, called mundur in Old Norse, paid by the groom or his family to the bride's family. This was not a purchase of the bride, but rather a compensation for the loss of her labor and fertility, and a demonstration of the groom's ability to support her. It also served as a sort of insurance for the bride. If the marriage dissolved through no fault of her own, she often retained control of the mundur. There was also the heimanfylgja, which was property or goods that the bride brought into the marriage from her own family, often intended as her personal property that she could retain if the marriage ended. These economic considerations were not incidental, they were foundational. Love might grow within a marriage, but it was rarely the primary catalyst for its formation. You might attend a feast, the longhouse filled with the aroma of roasted meat and the sounds of laughter and saga-telling. You see a young man strong and handsome engaging in a boasting contest, his voice booming with tales of daring raids. You might feel a flicker of interest, or perhaps you notice a young woman quietly skillful with her needlework, her hands deftly creating intricate patterns, and you are impressed by her diligence. These are the subtle observations, the quiet assessments that take the place of modern getting-to-know-you conversations. There are no, "What's your sign?" questions here, just a quiet appraisal of character and capability. One common historical misconception is that Viking women had no agency in their marriages. While parental approval was paramount and arranged marriages were common, women in the Viking Age possessed more rights and independence than many of their counterparts in other medieval societies. They could own property, inherit land, and even initiate divorce. This doesn't mean they had complete freedom to choose their partners, but they weren't simply chattel to be traded. There was a delicate balance between family expectations and individual preferences, a balance that could sometimes be tipped by strong personalities or persuasive arguments. Scholars still debate the true extent of individual autonomy in marriage decisions, with some arguing for more agency than traditionally assumed, while others emphasize the overriding importance of family and lineage. Consider for a moment the vastness of the Viking world. Journeys across seas to distant lands were common for men, and sometimes for women. If you were a Viking raider, your dating pool might expand to include women from foreign lands, perhaps captured in a raid or encountered through trade. These relationships, however, would operate under a different set of rules, often less formal and more about conquest or convenience than traditional marriage. But for those staying within their own communities, the web of kinship was incredibly intricate, sometimes leading to marriages between distant cousins. A practice that, while perhaps unsettling to modern sensibilities, was a common way to strengthen family bonds and prevent the dissipation of wealth. This intricate web of relationships meant that everyone knew everyone else's business, and discretion was often a luxury. Your family's reputation built over generations was a powerful force both for good and for ill in your own marriage prospects. So as you drift deeper into this world, remember that your initial dating experiences wouldn't involve candlelight dinners or awkward movie nights. They would be a meticulous community-wide assessment of your worth, your family's standing, and your potential contribution to the continuation and prosperity of your kin. It's a harsh truth, but one that ensured the survival and flourishing of Viking society in a demanding environment. You find yourself sitting in the smoke-filled great hall, the flickering firelight casting long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn timbers. The air is thick with the smell of roasting meat and brewing ale. You're not just here for a feast, though. This is where the real work of securing a future often began. Your family or your intended's family might have initiated discussions weeks or even months prior, perhaps through intermediaries. Respected elders, a trusted godai, or even just a well-meaning relative who saw a good match. But now it's becoming more formal. Imagine your father or perhaps a powerful uncle sitting across from the head of the other family. Their expressions are serious, their voices low but firm. This isn't a negotiation for a new longship. It's a negotiation for a human being's future, intertwined with the destiny of two kin groups. The primary focus of these discussions would be the bride wealth or munder. This wasn't some simple cash payment. Oh no, that would be far too easy. The munder could be anything of value: land, cattle, silver, finely crafted weapons, or even valuable textiles. It was a tangible demonstration of the groom's family's wealth and their commitment to the marriage. Think of it as a Viking-era security deposit, a very substantial one, ensuring the bride's future financial well-being. This wealth was traditionally paid by the groom's family to the bride's family, not directly to the bride herself, initially, though it was understood to be for her benefit and security. If the marriage unfortunately dissolved without her fault, she typically had strong claims to this munder. Then there was the dowry, or hymenphilgia, which is often confused with bride wealth in modern interpretations. The hymenphilgia was property or goods that the bride's family gave to her upon her marriage, which she brought with her into the new household. This could include household goods, animals, land, or even a share of her inheritance. Crucially, this was her personal property. She retained ownership of it even within the marriage and could in many cases take it with her if the marriage ended. So you might see a young woman arriving at her new home with her own chests of linens, perhaps a few milk cows, or even a small plot of land registered in her name. This detail is a fascinating example of the surprising level of financial autonomy that Viking Age women could possess, a fact often overlooked when picturing the rugged patriarchal society. It's like having your own independent investment portfolio before such a concept even existed. The discussions about the Munder and hymenphilgia were incredibly detailed. Every item would be scrutinized. Is that silver arm ring truly pure? Are those cattle healthy and fertile? Is the land productive? No detail was too small. This wasn't just about financial security, it was about honor and status. A generous Munder enhanced the groom's reputation, showing his wealth and commitment. A substantial hymenphilgia elevated the bride's standing, demonstrating the prosperity and generosity of her own family. These agreements were almost like treaties between two small kingdoms, laying out the terms of their future alliance. Once the financial and property aspects were hammered out, the formal betrothal or festar would take place. This was a solemn occasion, not a casual promise. It often involved witnesses from both families and the community serving as a public declaration of intent. You might stand beside your father feeling the weight of the moment as the terms are verbally agreed upon and perhaps sealed with a handshake, a linking of arms, or even a shared drink from a ceremonial horn. This act of festar was legally binding. It wasn't quite a marriage, but it was a formal commitment that carried significant weight. Breaking a betrothal without good cause could lead to hefty fines, or worse, a blood feud. It's like having a prenuptial agreement, but one where the social consequences of backing out were far more severe than just a lawyer's bill. Imagine the tension in the room as the final details are ironed out. Perhaps there's a disagreement over the number of sheep or the quality of a piece of land offered. Voices might rise, then soften as a compromise is reached. It's a delicate dance of give and take, balancing the desire for the best possible outcome for one's own kin with the need to establish a strong, lasting alliance. These weren't typically love matches before the betrothal, but rather calculated unions designed to benefit both families in tangible ways. However, it was hoped and often expected that affection and partnership would grow within the marriage. This is where modern sensibilities clash most strongly with Viking Age realities. The idea of marrying someone you barely know purely for strategic reasons can feel alien to us. Yet for them, it was simply the way of the world. Sometimes a chieftain or a powerful individual might have multiple wives or concubines reflecting their wealth and status. However, for the vast majority of people, monogamy was the norm, at least in terms of legal recognized marriage. The betrothal process ensured that these unions were taken seriously and had the full backing of both families and the law. It wasn't just a promise between two individuals, it was a contract between two kin groups binding them together. The legal ramifications were complex. The sagas, while often romanticized, provide glimpses into these legal frameworks. For instance, in the Icelandic sagas, there are detailed accounts of betrothal agreements and the consequences of their breach. These weren't just informal customs, they were part of a sophisticated legal system, even if unwritten for much of the Viking Age. They relied on oral agreements witnessed by many and the collective memory of the community. It's a fascinating contrast to our modern reliance on written contracts and legal professionals. Once the betrothal was complete, a period of anticipation would follow. This might last for a few weeks, months, or even a year or more, depending on practicalities like the time of year for a feast or the readiness of a new dwelling. During this time, the betrothed couple would still likely have limited direct interaction, with most communication happening through family members. This wasn't a time for casual dates or secret rendezvous. Propriety was paramount, and any hint of impropriety could jeopardize the entire arrangement and tarnish reputations. It's a very different form of getting to know you, one based on observation and reputation rather than intimate conversation. There's a humorous side to this intense practicality. Imagine the poor young Viking who truly fell in love with someone, only to find that their family's wealth or political standing just wasn't quite up to snuff for the ideal match. You can almost hear the sighs of exasperation from parents. Yes, son, she's lovely, but her uncle lost that sheep farm last winter, and her family lineage is, shall we say, a tad bit complicated. It's like trying to marry into a family whose credit score is just too low. One common historical fact that often surprises people is just how public these negotiations were. It wasn't a private affair between two individuals or even just two families. The community, or at least the leading figures within it, would often be aware of the discussions. This public aspect served to validate the agreement and ensure that both parties upheld their end of the bargain. After all, breaking such an agreement would bring shame not just upon the individual, but upon their entire kin group. The academic debate continues on just how much freedom individuals had to reject an unwanted match. While sagas sometimes depict strong-willed women refusing suitors or men choosing their own path, these are often the subjects of dramatic narratives, hinting that such defiance was noteworthy precisely because it wasn't the norm. Most often, the collective good of the family outweighed individual desires, though a particularly unhappy or abusive marriage could and often did lead to divorce, which we'll explore later. So, while you might have had a say, it was often within the confines of what your family deemed appropriate and beneficial. Ultimately, the process of bride wealth and betrothal in the Viking Age was a carefully constructed system, designed to ensure stability, prosperity, and the continuity of the family line. It laid the foundation for a new household, a new alliance, and a new chapter in the complex tapestry of Viking society. It was less about butterflies in the stomach and more about sturdy foundations and shared resources. You find yourself navigating the intricate social landscape of your new or soon-to-be new community. While the betrothal might have been a practical arrangement, the human heart, as we all know, is a fickle thing. Love and lust certainly existed in the Viking Age, just as they do in every human society. Sagas, poems, and runic inscriptions sometimes hint at passionate attachments, unrequited desires, and even scandalous affairs. However, these emotions were often constrained by the rigid framework of Viking Age law and custom. Imagine a young man, perhaps a seasoned warrior, returning from a successful raid whose eyes fall upon a woman not destined for him. Or a young woman betrothed to a distant kinsman she barely knows, finding herself drawn to a skilled craftsman in her own village. These are the whispers of the heart that then, as now, could complicate even the most carefully arranged plans. But unlike today, where personal feelings often dictate the trajectory of a relationship in the Viking Age, going against the established social order carried severe consequences. Let's talk about the legalities. Marriage, or Yonabon, was a highly regulated institution. It wasn't merely a religious or social union. It was a legal contract with precise rights and obligations for both husband and wife. The laws varied slightly from region to region, whether you were in Norway, Iceland, or Denmark, but the fundamental principles were similar. A legitimate marriage ensured the legitimacy of children, the inheritance of property, and the stability of the kin group. It was the bedrock of society. Any deviation from this bedrock could cause ripples or even tidal waves of trouble. Consider the concept of adultery. For a married woman, engaging in an extramarital affair was a grave offense. It could lead to her being divorced by her husband often without retaining her munder or hymenphilgia and facing social disgrace. The reasoning was primarily about paternity, ensuring the legitimacy of heirs and the purity of the family line. For a man, the consequences were often less severe, reflecting the patriarchal nature of the society, but he could still face fines or even legal action, especially if the affair was with a married woman and challenged another man's honor. It's a classic double standard, perhaps, but one deeply embedded in the legal and social fabric of the time. However, it wasn't always so black and white. There were often nuanced interpretations of the law, and local customs could play a significant role. For instance, some sagas suggest that while adultery was condemned, a man might tolerate his wife's affair if it brought political advantage, or if he himself had concubines. This highlights that Viking Age society, for all its strictures, was also pragmatic. What about relationships outside of formal marriage? Concubinage, particularly for wealthier men or chieftains, was not uncommon. These women, known as frilur, did not have the same legal standing as a wife, nor did their children have the same inheritance rights. However, they were not considered prostitutes and often lived openly within the household. It was a recognized, albeit lesser, form of relationship, often for men who sought to expand their lineage without the full legal and financial obligations of another formal marriage. This might seem contradictory to the emphasis on legitimacy, but it reveals the complexities of power status and male desire within the legal framework. Then there's the tantalizing, but historically less documented question of same-sex relationships. While the sagas and legal codes focus almost exclusively on heterosexual unions for the purpose of procreation and property, it's difficult to say with certainty that same-sex love didn't exist or wasn't tolerated in some forms. Some scholars point to ambiguous passages in sagas or suggest that certain rituals or social structures might have allowed for such relationships, particularly among warriors or in specific cultic contexts. However, direct evidence is scarce, and the societal emphasis on fertility and lineage would likely have made public recognition or legal sanction of such unions highly improbable. This is one of those areas where historians still debate with limited concrete evidence, often relying on careful interpretation of subtle hints rather than direct statements. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, and the haystack is mostly composed of legal codes focused on very different matters. The concept of honor played an enormous role in all relationships. An affront to a family's honor, whether through a broken betrothal, an unfaithful spouse, or an insult, could escalate rapidly. Blood feuds, though perhaps less common than popular imagination suggests, were a very real threat. Your actions in matters of love and lust therefore had consequences that stretched far beyond your immediate feelings, impacting your entire kin group. It's a stark reminder that personal desires were often subservient to collective reputation and stability. Imagine a scene where a man tries to steal a betrothed woman. This would not be a romantic elopement. This would be a legal and social catastrophe, likely leading to violence fines and a lasting stain on his and her family's honor. The law provided strict penalties for such transgressions designed to maintain order and prevent chaos. The sagas are replete with tales of the dire consequences of unchecked passion, highlighting the societal norms by presenting dramatic examples of those who defied them. Despite these strictures, love in its various forms found a way. While arranged marriages were the norm, it wasn't uncommon for spouses to develop genuine affection and respect for one another over time. Partnership in managing a farm, raising children, and facing the harsh realities of life together could forge strong bonds. Many sagas speak of deep conjugal love of husbands and wives who stood by each other through thick and thin. This wasn't the passionate whirlwind romance we often see in modern media, but a more enduring, pragmatic, and often deeply loyal form of affection. You might hear a skald poet at a feast reciting verses about a hero's devotion to his wife, or a chieftain's deep sorrow after the loss of his beloved. These artistic expressions suggest that while the framework of marriage was practical, the emotional content within it could be profound. It's a testament to the enduring power of human connection, even within a society that prioritized lineage and practicality. One fascinating detail that often goes unnoticed is the concept of a hand fasting, which some scholars believe was a less formal temporary union, particularly in earlier periods or in certain regions. It was a binding agreement for a set period after which the couple could choose to make it a permanent marriage or go their separate ways. While its prevalence and exact legal status are debated, it suggests a degree of flexibility in relationship formation that contrasts with the more rigid formal marriage. Historians still debate whether hand fasting was a widespread, legally recognized precursor to marriage, or merely a literary device in some sagas. It's a tantalizing glimpse into a potentially more fluid approach to commitment. So while your heart might flutter for someone across the hall, the reality of Viking Age life dictates that your desires must align with the laws and customs of your community. To ignore them is to invite chaos not just into your own life, but into the intricate web of family and societal relations. It's a world where passion is tempered by practicality, and where the rule of law often dictates the path of love. You stand in the heart of the Viking household, the Longhouse, which was truly the domain of the woman. While men might have been out raiding, trading, or tending to fields, it was the wife who managed the complex machinery of daily life within these walls. You see her perhaps grinding grain by the hearth, her hands strong and calloused from work, or supervising the preparation of a feast, her voice firm and clear as she directs the household staff or younger family members. This wasn't a world where women were fragile ornaments. They were the backbone of the economy and the family unit. The image of the Viking shield maiden, while captivating, is largely a romanticized notion. The vast majority of Viking Age women were not warriors but powerful homemakers, managers, and economic actors. Their value in a marriage was not just about bearing children, though that was undeniably crucial for lineage continuation, but also their competence in running a farm, managing resources, and contributing to the family's wealth. A man looking for a wife wasn't simply seeking beauty, he was seeking a partner capable of ensuring his household's prosperity and survival. This focus on practical skills gave women a significant amount of respect, and in turn, a degree of agency that might surprise you. Consider the sagas which, despite often being written by men, frequently portray strong, intelligent, and influential women. These women could advise their husbands manage complex legal disputes and even hold considerable political sway. They might not have chosen their husbands in the way we choose partners today, but they certainly weren't without influence. They could, for instance, voice strong objections to an unsuitable match, or use their family's standing to subtly steer negotiations in a preferred direction. While the ultimate decision often rested with the male head of the family, a wise father or brother would certainly listen to the woman's opinion, especially if she was known for her intelligence and good judgment. One of the most striking aspects of Viking Age women's rights was their ability to own property and inherit wealth. This meant that a woman entering marriage often brought her own heimanfælge, as we discussed, which remained her legal property. This gave her a significant degree of financial independence within the marriage. If her husband died, she often had the right to inherit and manage the family farm until her sons came of age, or even indefinitely. This wasn't just a symbolic right, it translated into real power. A woman who controlled land and resources commanded respect. This is a crucial historical fact that sets Viking women apart from many of their European contemporaries. What about the act of marriage itself? While arranged marriages were common, it was not usually a forced union in the most brutal sense. The sagas describe instances where women fiercely resisted unwanted marriages, sometimes even leading to dramatic consequences like elopement or violence. While these tales are often exceptional, they suggest that a woman's consent, even if tacitly given through her family, was an important element. Historians still debate the precise level of individual consent versus familial obligation, but it's clear that a complete disregard for a woman's feelings could lead to serious social repercussions and instability. Think about the moment of the wedding itself. It was a joyous occasion, a feast that brought families and communities together. The bride, adorned in her finest clothing and jewelry, would be the center of attention. While the ritual varied, it often involved an exchange of symbolic gifts and perhaps a shared drink. The public nature of the ceremony solidified the union and the new alliance between families. It was a day of celebration, but also a profound transition for the woman as she left her father's household to establish her own within her husband's family. Life within the marriage, however, was not always a bed of roses. Domestic violence, though condemned by law, certainly occurred. However, Viking Age laws also provided women with the right to divorce, a right that was surprisingly progressive for the era. A woman could initiate a divorce on several grounds, including abuse, impotence, or even simply if her husband dressed in womanly clothing, suggesting a violation of gender norms. This ability to dissolve an unhappy or unsafe marriage provided women with a critical safeguard and further illustrates their legal standing. It's a powerful indication that they were not merely possessions. You might observe a scene where a woman, perhaps a widow, is managing her own farm. She directs her thralls, slaves, makes decisions about crops and livestock, and engages in trade. Her authority is clear and respected within the community. This wasn't an anomaly, it was a recognized and respected role for women. This practical power, derived from their ability to manage resources and contribute economically, imbued them with a certain gravitas that transcended mere gender roles. Consider the training a young girl received. From a young age, she would learn the complex skills necessary to run a household, cooking, weaving, tending to livestock, managing supplies, and even basic medicine. These were not just domestic chores, they were vital survival skills. A woman who excelled at these tasks was highly valued, and her reputation for competence would undoubtedly enhance her prospects in the dating and marriage market. It's like having an impressive resume, but instead of bullet points about coding skills, it's about your mastery of butter churning and flax spinning. There's a subtle humor in the historical details here. Imagine a Viking man renowned for his strength and ferocity in battle returning home, only to be gently but firmly directed by his wife on the proper way to mend a fishing net or prepare a meal. The domestic sphere was where the woman's authority was paramount, and even the most hardened warrior likely knew better than to cross his capable wife in her domain. It's like a corporate CEO coming home and being told by his partner how to properly load the dishwasher. One lesser-known fact is the role of foster in Viking society. Children, especially those of high status, were often sent to be raised in other households, sometimes even in different regions. This practice served to strengthen alliances between families and provided children with broader experiences and connections. For girls, being fostered in a well-regarded household could significantly enhance her marriage prospects, as it would demonstrate her upbringing and expose her to potential suitors from other powerful families. This detail highlights the intricate social engineering that went into forming alliances and securing futures extending far beyond the immediate family unit. So, while the Viking Age was undeniably patriarchal in many aspects, the role of women was far from subservient. They possessed significant legal rights, economic autonomy, and social influence. Their agency, while operating within societal constraints, allowed them to be powerful forces in their own lives and in the lives of their families, shaping the very fabric of Viking society, even when it came to the ultimate decision of who they would spend their lives with. You're sitting by the roaring fire, the familiar sounds of the longhouse around you. Perhaps you hear a hushed conversation or witness a strained silence between a couple. It's a stark reminder that, even in a society built on practical alliances, not every union was destined to last happily ever after. Unlike many other medieval European societies where marriage was often considered an indissoluble sacrament in the Viking Age, divorce was a remarkably straightforward and legally recognized process. It wasn't easy, perhaps, but it was certainly an option available to both men and women, provided certain conditions were met. Imagine a woman, her face etched with a quiet determination, approaching the thing. the local assembly where legal matters were decided. She might be there to declare her intention to divorce her husband. This wasn't a whispered plea in a private chamber. It was a public declaration often requiring witnesses. The grounds for divorce were varied and surprisingly practical. For a woman, valid reasons included physical abuse, impotence, or even if her husband dressed in womanly clothing, which was considered a profound insult and a violation of traditional gender roles. An indication that he wasn't fulfilling his role as a man in the community. It's like breaking up with someone because they insist on wearing socks with sandals to every important event, but with far more severe social implications. For a man, grounds for divorce might include his wife's infidelity, though, as mentioned, this was a more serious offense for women due to paternity concerns, neglecting household duties, or even being too quarrelsome. Essentially, if your spouse wasn't pulling their weight or was actively undermining the household's honor or prosperity, you had legal recourse. This practicality underscores the Viking Age view of marriage as a working partnership. If the partnership failed, it could be dissolved. The process of divorce typically involved a public declaration of intent, usually at the thing or before witnesses. Both parties would declare their intention to divorce, often listing the reasons. This transparency was crucial, as it helped to establish the legitimacy of the divorce and the subsequent division of property. It's a far cry from the modern concept of irreconcilable differences and a private lawyer's office. Here, your entire community would be privy to the dissolution of your union. Now, let's talk about the division of assets, because that was often the most contentious part. The bride wealth munder and the dowry hymenfilgia played a crucial role here. If the divorce was initiated by the wife due to her husband's fault, e.g. abuse, she would often retain her hymenfilgia and might even be entitled to the munder that her husband's family had paid to her father. This provided a significant safety net for women and ensured they weren't left destitute after a marriage ended. For a society often characterized by its perceived brutality, this level of legal protection for women in divorce is a powerful and often overlooked detail. If the divorce was initiated by the husband, or if the wife was deemed at fault, the division of property might be less favorable to her. The munder might be returned to the husband's family, and she might only retain her hymenfilgia. This aspect highlights that while divorce was possible, there were consequences, and legal arguments over fault and responsibility were undoubtedly a common feature of the thing. It's like a messy modern divorce, but instead of lawyers arguing over financial disclosures, it's about who threw the first punch or whose cows were actually healthier. Children were another major consideration. Custody arrangements were often determined by law and custom, with younger children typically remaining with the mother, especially girls, while older sons might go with the father. However, the exact arrangements could vary and were often subject to negotiation, with the welfare of the children and the continuation of the family line being paramount concerns. The community, and particularly the extended kin groups, would often play a role in mediating these difficult situations, as the welfare of the children was a collective concern. One fascinating but lesser-known detail is that sometimes a husband might attempt to force his wife into a divorce by abusing her to the point where she had grounds to leave him, thus avoiding his own obligations regarding the munder. However, laws often specifically address such tactics, attempting to protect women from such manipulation. This illustrates the legal system's attempt to provide a degree of fairness, even in a patriarchal society. Historians still debate the frequency of such abusive divorces compared to more amicable separations, as the sagas often focus on the dramatic and unusual rather than the everyday. The social implications of divorce were significant, though perhaps less severe than in other cultures. A divorced person, particularly a woman, might face some social stigma, but it wasn't necessarily a lifelong curse. Many divorced individuals, both men and women, went on to remarry, often finding more suitable partners. The emphasis was often on the reason for the divorce. If it was for legitimate and legally recognized grounds, the social repercussions were minimized. If it was due to a serious breach of honor or a grave transgression, the stigma could be more lasting. You might hear an old saga being recited telling of a famous queen who divorced her abusive husband and went on to rule her lands independently. While these tales are often embellished, they reflect the underlying legal and social structures that allowed for such possibilities. It reminds you that even in a world centuries away, people grappled with the same fundamental challenges of human relationships: love, disappointment, and the messy process of disentangling lives that once seemed irrevocably bound. The continuity of the family unit, even after a divorce, was paramount. Children from a previous marriage were still recognized as members of their original kin group, and alliances forged through marriage might be strained, but not always entirely severed. It was a complex dance of maintaining social order while allowing for the dissolution of individual unions. So, as you listen to the crackling fire, consider the surprising pragmatism of Viking Age divorce. It wasn't always clean, it wasn't always easy, but it provided an avenue for individuals, particularly women, to escape unhappy or dangerous marriages, laying the groundwork for a fresh start in a society that, while rugged, understood the importance of individual agency within the bounds of law and custom. You step away from the formal discussions of bride wealth and divorce, moving into the quieter, sometimes more shadowy corners of Viking Age relationships. While marriage was the ideal, the bedrock of society life was as ever far more complicated and nuanced. Not every bond fit neatly into the legal definition of hjónaband. Imagine a wealthy chieftain, his longhouse grand and bustling. You might notice not just his legal wife, the husfreyja or mistress of the house, but also other women who clearly hold a respected though different position within the household. These were often concubines or friller. This was a recognized, albeit lesser, form of relationship, particularly common among powerful men who could afford to support multiple households or maintain multiple intimate partners. A friller was not considered a prostitute. She often lived openly in the man's household, might manage certain aspects of it, and could even have children with him. The key distinction, however, lay in legal status and inheritance rights. The children born to a friller were generally not considered legal heirs in the same way as children born to a legitimate wife. While a father might acknowledge and provide for his frillur's children, they did not have the same automatic claim to inheritance or lineage as his legitimate offspring. This was a significant legal difference impacting the continuity of property and power. It's like having a common law marriage versus a fully registered one, but with much more rigid social hierarchies. Why would a man take a frillur? Often it was a display of wealth and status. Supporting multiple women and their children required significant resources. It could also be a way to have more children, expanding one's lineage without the full legal and economic entanglements of another formal marriage, especially if his legal wife was unable to bear more children or had passed away. Sometimes a frillur might have been a woman taken during a raid who then integrated into the household, or a woman from a lower social standing who offered companionship in labor. For the women themselves, being a frillur was not without its benefits, especially if it meant living in a wealthy household and gaining a degree of protection and comfort. While not enjoying the full rights of a wife, a frillur might still wield considerable influence within the domestic sphere, particularly if she bore children who were favored by the man. However, her position was inherently less secure than that of a legal wife, dependent largely on the man's favor and the shifting tides of his family dynamics. Then there are the relationships that fall entirely outside the documented legal and social norms. What about casual encounters, fleeting affections, or passionate affairs that were not meant for legal recognition? The human impulse for desire and connection doesn't disappear just because a society has strict rules. Sagas hint at illicit love's secret meetings and the dramatic consequences of forbidden passions. These relationships, however, carried significant risks, particularly for women who could face social ostracism, loss of honor, and severe legal penalties if discovered, as discussed in the context of adultery. One fascinating but often overlooked aspect is the potential for relationships between thralls-slaves. While they were property, thralls were still human beings with emotions and desires. Their relationships, however, would have been entirely at the mercy of their owners. They could not legally marry or own property, and their unions would not have been recognized by law. Any children they had would also be born into slavery. Yet it's not hard to imagine bonds of affection forming between them, a small flicker of human connection in an otherwise brutal existence. This is a subtle and often sad detail that reminds us of the humanity, even in the most subjugated parts of Viking society. Now let's venture into a particularly debated area: same-sex relationships. As mentioned before, direct evidence for institutionalized or openly accepted same-sex unions in the Viking Age is virtually non-existent in the primary sources' sagas, law codes. The sources overwhelmingly focus on heterosexual relationships due to their direct link to lineage inheritance and social stability. However, the absence of explicit mention doesn't necessarily mean the absence of practice. Scholars continue to debate whether same-sex relationships existed and what their social acceptance might have been. Some argue that the rigid gender roles and the emphasis on procreation would have made such relationships deeply taboo and hidden. Others suggest that certain contexts, such as close bonds among warriors or specific religious practices, might have allowed for more fluidity or tolerance, though not necessarily public recognition or legal standing. It's akin to searching for echoes in a vast silent hall. We have to rely on very subtle interpretations looking for hints in the nuances of language or potential underlying social structures. For instance, some scholars analyze the Old Norse concept of ergi, unmanliness or effeminacy, and its severe condemnation as an indication of strong societal norms against non-normative gender expression, which might imply a corresponding disapproval of male same-sex acts. However, this is largely inferential. For female same-sex relationships, even fewer clues exist, making it an even more challenging area for historical research. It's a reminder that history, especially when dealing with private lives and marginalized groups, often leaves us with more questions than answers. Consider the pragmatic reality: every relationship, regardless of its form, had to fit into the existing social and economic structure. Even casual relationships carried a potential cost, whether in terms of reputation, legal penalty, or the unexpected arrival of children. This pragmatic view often overshadowed purely emotional considerations, ensuring that society continued to function. One particular example of other relationships might be forced unions or partnerships resulting from slavery or capture. Women and men taken as thralls during raids might have been compelled into sexual relationships with their captors or other thralls. These were not relationships of choice but of coercion, yet they contributed to the diverse tapestry of human interaction in the Viking Age. The children born from such unions, known as Skjalf or Embaderson, son of a slave woman, would generally inherit the mother status, meaning they were born into slavery. This is a stark reminder of the harsh realities of the time and the power dynamics that shaped many relationships. So while the idealized vision of Viking Age dating might revolve around formal marriages, the reality was far more complex. From recognized concubinage to hidden affairs, and the untold stories of those whose loves might not have fit any societal mold. The Viking world, much like our own, was a mosaic of human connections, some sanctioned, some tolerated, and some pushed to the fringes of visibility. You find yourself in the flickering light of the longhouse once more, but this time the air is filled not just with the scent of wood smoke, but with the rich tones of a storyteller's voice. A skald, perhaps, or simply a gifted saga teller, is captivating the audience with tales of heroes and heroines, of fierce battles, and crucially for our discussion tonight, of powerful loves and heart-wrenching betrayals. This is how many of the Viking Age's dating ideals were transmitted, not through self-help books or online dating profiles, but through sagas, skaldic poetry, and oral traditions. Imagine listening to a detailed account of a hero brave and honorable who falls deeply in love with a woman of remarkable beauty and spirit. The sagas often portray love as a powerful, sometimes overwhelming force. It could drive men to great deeds or to terrible acts of revenge. While formal marriages were practical, the sagas show us that intense personal attraction and profound affection were certainly part of the human experience. These stories passed down through generations served as a kind of cultural blueprint, subtly influencing what people aspired to in their own relationships, even if those aspirations were often tempered by reality. Consider the role of skaldic poetry. Skalds were court poets who composed intricate verses often for chieftains and kings. Their poems, highly formalized and complex, celebrated heroic deeds, but also sometimes delved into themes of love, longing, and desire. You might hear a poem praising a woman's beauty, her golden hair, or her keen mind, or perhaps a lament from a warrior separated from his beloved. These poetic expressions, while often stylized, provide glimpses into the aesthetic and emotional ideals of the time. They suggest that beauty, both physical and in terms of character, was admired and celebrated. It's like the pop songs of their era, except far more complex in their meter and kenning-filled metaphors. However, the seduction portrayed in sagas is rarely about whispered sweet nothings or romantic gestures. It's often about deeds and reputation. A man would woo a woman, not by bringing her flowers, but by demonstrating his prowess in battle, his generosity to his followers, his wisdom in counsel, or his ability to manage a successful farm. A woman, in turn, might be admired for her intelligence, her skill in household management, her weaving prowess, or her family's honor. These were the qualities that truly impressed in a society where survival and prosperity were paramount. It's a very different kind of peacocking than you might see today. One common thread in the sagas is the idea of love at first sight, or at least a strong immediate attraction. Characters often fixate on a particular person, sometimes for years, driven by a deep longing. Think of Gunnar from Njal's saga, a paragon of courage who is captivated by Hallgerdr, a woman of striking beauty but also a troubled past. Their love is intense but ultimately tragic, highlighting the perils of passion unbound by prudence. These stories, while dramatic, perhaps served as a release valve for emotions that couldn't always be openly expressed in a society focused on arranged marriages. But here's a crucial distinction. While love was celebrated, it was often framed within the context of honor and reputation. A love that brought dishonor to a family or led to a blood feud was condemned. Many saga narratives serve as cautionary tales illustrating the disastrous consequences of acting purely on passion without regard for social norms or legal repercussions. It's like a Greek tragedy, but with more axes. Think about the way characters communicate their affection. It's rarely direct declarations of love. Instead, it might be through a significant gift, a brave act performed in their honor, or a subtle gesture that signifies a deeper connection. A man might compose a personal verse for a woman praising her virtues, or wear a particular piece of jewelry that belonged to her. These were the subtle codes of courtship in a world that valued discretion and action over flowery words. One lesser-known detail is the role of personal ornaments and clothing in signaling status and attractiveness. Finely woven clothes, intricate jewelry like arm rings, brooches and pendants, and elaborate hairstyles were not just fashion statements. They were powerful nonverbal signals of wealth, skill, and eligibility. A woman adorned with exquisite silver and amber might be signaling her family's prosperity and her own value as a potential spouse. A man wearing a finely crafted sword belt or richly embroidered tunic would be projecting his strength and status. It's like swiping right on a dating app, but based on someone's entire outfit rather than just their face. The academic debate continues on how much sagas truly reflect everyday life versus idealizing or dramatizing it. Historians still debate whether the passionate loves depicted in sagas were rare exceptions or suppressed desires of the common person. Were they just good stories, or did they provide a blueprint for real-life aspirations? It's likely a bit of both. The stories provided a vocabulary for complex emotions, even if expressing those emotions in daily life was constrained by social reality. Consider the oral nature of these traditions. Stories were not just read, they were performed, recited, and reinterpreted, allowing for variations and localized nuances. A local saga might emphasize certain virtues, while another from a different region might highlight different qualities in a desirable partner. This fluidity meant that ideals of love and attraction were not monolithic, but adapted to local contexts and community values. So, as the saga teller's voice fades into the night, you're left with a deeper understanding of how the Viking mind conceived of love and connection. It was a world where practicality reigned, but where the human heart still yearned for passion, where honor and reputation were paramount, but where the brave deed or the beautiful verse could still capture the imagination and perhaps a lasting love. You find yourself in the grand hall of a powerful chieftain, perhaps, during a gathering where alliances are forged and broken. The air is thick not just with the scent of roasted boar and mead, but with the palpable tension of unspoken negotiations. Here among the elite of Viking society, dating was less about personal affection and more about strategic mergers. Marriage for these powerful families was a crucial tool for consolidating wealth, expanding influence, and securing peace. Imagine a young noblewoman, her status evident in the intricate patterns of her clothing and the gleam of the gold torque around her neck. She might be considered a valuable asset in the complex political game played by her father and brothers. Her hand in marriage could secure a vital alliance with a neighboring chieftain and a long-standing blood feud, or provide access to new trade routes. Her personal feelings, while perhaps considered, would almost certainly take a back seat to the greater good of her kin group. It's like a medieval chess game, and she's a very important piece destined to be moved where she can best serve the family's strategy. For a young man of high standing, the choice of a bride was equally, if not more, politically charged. He needed a wife who would not only bear strong heirs, but also bring with her a powerful lineage, valuable land, or crucial political connections. Marrying into the right family could elevate his own status, provide military support in times of conflict, or open doors to new opportunities for raiding and trade. His father, the chieftain, would meticulously weigh the pros and cons of potential matches, much like a modern CEO evaluates a business acquisition. Consider the sagas that depict these high-stakes marital arrangements. While they might include elements of romance, the underlying motivations are almost always about power. For example, the marriage of a king's daughter might be offered to a powerful earl to ensure his loyalty, or to a foreign ruler to cement a peace treaty. These were not just personal unions. They were state-level negotiations that shaped the political landscape of entire regions. A successful marriage could bring decades of stability. A failed one could ignite a war. One common historical fact is that intermarriage between ruling families was a primary method of forging and maintaining alliances. You would frequently see chieftains or jarls marrying their children to those of other influential figures, creating a complex web of kinship that linked powerful houses across Scandinavia and even beyond. This system helped to stabilize a society that, without strong centralized governments, relied heavily on personal bonds and mutual obligations. There's a fascinating, if somewhat cold, practicality to it all. Imagine a meeting between two rival chieftains. Instead of clashing swords, they sit down to negotiate a marriage between their children. The terms would be precise: how much land, how many thralls, what share of future raids. It's like an ancient version of a corporate merger agreement where the assets include the future happiness of two young people and the potential for a new generation of warriors or powerful household managers. What happens if a woman from a powerful family falls in love with a man of lower status? This was almost certainly a recipe for disaster. Such a union would bring dishonor to her family, dilute their lineage, and undermine their strategic goals. While sagas might romanticize such forbidden loves in reality, they would likely be met with fierce opposition and perhaps even violence to preserve the family's status and strategic position. It's like a modern royal trying to marry someone who isn't even remotely famous, a complete non-starter. Conversely, a powerful man might take a frailer concubine from a lower social standing. This allowed him to have more children and perhaps satisfy personal desires without entering into a binding, high-stakes political marriage. As we discussed earlier, the children from these unions would have a different, lesser legal status, ensuring that the main lineage remained pure for the purpose of inheriting power and land. One unique detail from the sagas is the concept of bride abduction. Not a romantic elopement, but sometimes a political act. While often portrayed dramatically, these were usually hostile acts, a direct challenge to the bride's family, and almost always led to feuds and violence. It was a raw display of power aiming to force a union that couldn't be achieved through negotiation. These incidents were rare and highly destabilizing, underlining the importance of formal negotiated agreements. Scholars still debate the extent to which individual choice played a role in high-status marriages, acknowledging that while love matches were rare, a complete disregard for the feelings of the bride or groom might also lead to resentment and instability within the alliance. A wise family head would seek a match that, while strategic, was not entirely abhorrent to their child, as an unhappy spouse could undermine the very alliance it was meant to secure. It's a subtle negotiation between practicality and the unpredictable nature of human emotions. The legacy of these politically motivated marriages shaped the future of Scandinavia for centuries. Royal lines were established through strategic unions, landholdings were consolidated, and peace was often maintained through the intricate web of familial connections that marriage created. It's a powerful reminder that dating for the elite in the Viking Age was far from a personal journey. It was a matter of state dictated by the relentless pursuit of power and stability in a harsh and competitive world. You are now looking at the very core of Viking Age existence, the driving force behind many of the choices you've explored so far. Whether it was a formal marriage or a concubinage, whether it was driven by love or by political ambition, the ultimate purpose of nearly every union in the Viking Age was the production of children and the continuation of the family legacy. Without heirs, a family line withered lands could be lost, and the memory of ancestors might fade. This was a fear far more profound than any personal disappointment in love. Imagine the joyous anticipation surrounding the birth of a child, especially a son. While daughters were highly valued for their ability to form new alliances and manage households, a son was often seen as the direct continuation of the paternal line, the future warrior farmer or chieftain, who would carry on the family name and ensure its prosperity. The act of giving birth was fraught with danger in the Viking Age, and the survival of both mother and child was a cause for immense celebration. You might hear the cheers and joyous shouts echoing from a longhouse as news of a successful birth spreads through the community. The moment a child was born, particularly a son, their legitimacy was paramount. This is where the strict legal framework of marriage truly came into play. A child born within a recognized marriage was a legitimate heir with full rights to inheritance, social standing, and protection under the law. This legal clarity was crucial for the stability of property and power within society. This is also why adultery was such a severe transgression for women. It directly threatened the purity of the lineage and the certainty of paternity. Conversely, the children born to concubines, while often acknowledged and cared for by their father, did not typically possess the same automatic inheritance rights as legitimate children. Their future was often more precarious, dependent on the father's specific provisions or the willingness of the legal heirs to accept them. This distinction highlights the deep societal emphasis on legitimate lineage for the purpose of maintaining social order and property distribution. It's like a Game of Thrones, but the stakes are very real farms and longhouses, not just symbolic crowns. The upbringing of children was a communal effort, but with distinct gender roles. Boys would learn the skills of farming, hunting, warfare, and trade from their fathers, uncles, and older male relatives. They would be trained in the use of weapons from a young age, preparing them for the harsh realities of a life that might involve raiding or defending their lands. Girls, on the other hand, would be educated in the intricate arts of household management from their mothers and older female relatives, spinning, weaving, cooking, brewing, and supervising thralls. These skills were not merely domestic, they were essential for the economic survival of the household. A well-trained daughter was a highly desirable asset in the marriage market, ensuring the future prosperity of her own household. One common historical fact is the practice of fosterage, where children were sent to be raised in another household, often with relatives or allied families. This practice was common among the elite and served multiple purposes. It cemented alliances between families, provided the fostered child with a broader education and network of connections, and could even serve as a form of hostage in political agreements, ensuring good behavior between allied families. For a child, being fostered could significantly shape their future prospects, exposing them to different customs and influential figures. It's like a very early form of boarding school, but with far more emphasis on practical skills and less on algebra. The naming of children was also deeply significant. Children were often named after deceased relatives, particularly respected ancestors. This practice was believed to transfer certain qualities or virtues of the namesake to the child, and it also served to reinforce the continuity of the family line and the memory of those who had come before. Imagine the weight of expectation on a young boy named after a legendary warrior ancestor. The importance of legacy extended beyond just direct descendants. A family's honor, era, and reputation were meticulously guarded and passed down through generations. Children were taught the sagas of their ancestors, learning about their deeds, their feuds, and their triumphs. They understood that their own actions would reflect upon their entire kin group, living and dead. This profound sense of continuity meant that marriage was not just about two individuals. It was about ensuring the future and upholding the honor of countless generations. What happens if a couple was unable to have children? This would be a profound tragedy in the Viking Age. While adoption sometimes occurred and concubinage could offer an alternative for men seeking heirs, the absence of direct legitimate offspring was a serious blow to a family's legacy. It could lead to the dissolution of the marriage as impotence was a ground for divorce, or even to a male relative from another branch of the family being designated as an heir to prevent the family line from dying out. One fascinating detail that is often overlooked is the cultural importance of the umbilical cord and the placenta. In some Norse traditions, these were ritually buried sometimes beneath the hearth or near the family home as a symbolic act, connecting the new child to the land and the ancestors. This further underscores the deep connection between new life and the continuation of the family unit, rooted literally and figuratively in the land they inhabited. Historians still debate the precise meaning and prevalence of these rituals, but they highlight the reverence for the cycle of life and the importance of ensuring the family's place in the world. So, as you reflect on the bustling longhouse filled with the laughter of children and the wisdom of elders, you realize that for the Vikings, dating and marriage were not just about finding a partner for life. They were about securing the future, forging a powerful legacy, and ensuring that the threads of the family line would continue to weave themselves into the rich tapestry of history generation after generation. You find yourself standing at the edge of the fjord, the cool, crisp air carrying the scent of pine and distant sea spray. The sun dips towards the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the ancient landscape. You've journeyed through the intricate world of Viking Age relationships, a world that often feels both alien and strangely familiar. As the last echoes of sagas and legal codes fade, it's time to reflect on how their approach to dating resonates with or strikingly differs from our own. Consider for a moment the overwhelming emphasis on family and community in the Viking Age. Your worth as a potential partner was inextricably linked to your lineage, your family's honor, and their economic standing. Contrast this with modern dating, where the focus is often intensely individualistic. What do you bring to the table? What are your interests? What's your vibe? While families might still offer opinions and financial stability is certainly a consideration, the idea of your entire kin group scrutinizing a potential partner's ancestral sheep farm is delightfully anachronistic. We've moved from collective survival to individual fulfillment as the primary driver of relationships. Then there's the pragmatism of marriage. For the Vikings, marriage was first and foremost a strategic alliance, a way to consolidate resources, forge peace, and ensure the continuation of the family line. Love was hoped for, perhaps even expected to grow, but it was rarely the initiating factor. Think about your last romantic comedy. Was it about negotiating the number of cattle for a munder? Probably not. Modern relationships ideally begin with a spark, a connection, a shared sense of humor. We seek emotional intimacy and personal compatibility, often prioritizing these over material gains or familial dictates. The very notion of an arranged marriage can send shivers down our contemporary spines. Yet it was the norm for the Vikings. The agency of women in the Viking Age, while constrained by societal norms, was remarkably progressive compared to many other medieval societies. Their rights to own property, inherit wealth, and initiate divorce provided them with a degree of power that often surprises modern audiences. While they might not have chosen their husbands freely, they certainly weren't voiceless. This is perhaps one of the most intriguing points of resonance. The underlying desire for autonomy and fairness within relationships, even if expressed through different legal and social mechanisms. We too value equal partnership, albeit in a world where property rights and divorce laws are vastly different. The legalistic nature of relationships also stands out. Every step from betrothal to divorce was often publicly declared and legally binding. The consequences of transgressions were clear, sometimes brutally so. Our modern dating landscape, in contrast, is often a murky morass of unspoken rules, unwritten expectations, and often ambiguous commitments. We have legal contracts for marriage, of course, but the preliminary dating phase is largely unregulated, a wild west of personal preference and often profound confusion. Imagine having to publicly declare your intentions to court someone at a local assembly. The sheer awkwardness alone would probably deter most of us. And what about the concept of reputation? In the Viking Age, your reputation and that of your family preceded you. It was your social credit score, your personal brand built over generations. One misstep, one act of dishonor could taint your prospects for years. Today, while reputation still matters, especially in smaller communities, the vastness of our digital world and the fluidity of social circles allow for more reinvention, more anonymity, and perhaps more fleeting judgment. You can simply delete your dating app profile and start fresh. For the Vikings, your past followed you like a shadow. Finally, the ultimate purpose of relationships, children, and legacy. For the Vikings, children were the living embodiment of a family's future, the continuation of their line, their honor, and their land. While many modern couples choose to have children and certainly cherish them, the societal pressure to procreate as a fundamental duty for the continuation of your lineage is far less pervasive. Our definition of a successful relationship is often centered on the happiness and fulfillment of the couple themselves rather than solely on their reproductive output. It's a shift from collective survival to individual happiness. As the last light fades from the sky and the first stars begin to twinkle, you realize that while the Vikings' dating world was undeniably harsher, more pragmatic, and deeply entwined with survival, it also shared fundamental human desires for connection, for partnership, and for a place in the vast unfolding story of humanity. Perhaps the greatest lesson from the Viking Age is that while the external forms of our relationships may change with the centuries, the underlying human need to find someone to journey through life with, in whatever form that takes, remains as constant as the northern stars.